Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading skyward. Well, not literally, but digging into some really interesting articles you brought together.
Yeah, we've got pieces from Al Jazeera, Telangana Today, Mushatu Magazine, and also New Space Economy.
Right. And our mission today is basically to unpack this whole emerging world of space tourism. Who's involved, what's driving it, and maybe what the bigger picture is here.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, I think, looking at these sources together is how they capture this specific moment in time. We're really seeing the very, very early days of what could be a huge industry. And your selection highlights all the different angles, doesn't it? From like the personal ambitions to the big societal questions.
Okay, so let's jump straight in then. The thing that really felt like the starting gun, maybe, was that race back in July 2021. Richard Branson versus Jeff Bezos.
Oh, yeah.
Branson's Virgin Galactic flight got there just, 9 days before Bezos' Blue Origin? That felt pretty significant.
It really did. And it sort of underlined this bigger shift we're seeing, the growing role of private companies in space.
Right. Not just governments anymore.
Exactly. We've seen it building, of course, with NASA's commercial crew and cargo programs, getting private companies to ferry astronauts and supplies up to the ISS. And that whole initiative has also, crucially, pushed costs down. I mean, think about it. A seat on SpaceX's Crew Dragon is around, what, $55 million for NASA?
Yeah.
Which sounds like a lot, but it's way less than the, $90 million they were paying Russia for a Soyuz seat.
Wow. Okay.
So that kind of cost reduction, it really fuels everything else.
And it makes you think about the groundwork laid even before that, doesn't it? Like Peter Diamandis and the X Prize back in the late 90s.
Ah, yes.
That challenge, building a reusable private spacecraft, that feels like a really early spark,
It absolutely was. And what's fascinating there is the direct line, right? From that prize to where we are now.
How so?
Well, Spaceship On won the prize. And that directly inspired Richard Branson to go and found Virgin Galactic in 2004.
Ah, okay.
Now, it wasn't a smooth ride, obviously. There was the tragic Spaceship Two accident in 2014.
Yeah, I remember that.
But they pushed through, had a successful spaceflight in 2018, which proved the tech worked. And that ultimately paved the way for Branson's own flight in 2021. It's a story of, well, ambition and resilience, really.
Right, so let's focus on that Branson flight then. Virgin Galactic's VSS Unity. It went up to, what, just over 80 kilometers,
Right.
50 miles or so,
Giving
the crew, 3 minutes of weightlessness and those amazing views. And it was 6 people total.
Yeah.
Pilots and some company folks.
That's right. And that suborbital flight, that quick up and down, that's really the core of what Virgin Galactic offers right now. It gives you that taste of space, the floating, the view, without the huge complexity and time commitment of going into orbit.
Right. So contrast that with Bezos' planned flight right after on Blue Origin's New Shepard. One thing that really stood out there was that mystery bedder.
Oh, yeah, the $28 million seat.
Exactly. I mean, what does that number even tell you about the hype, the exclusivity?
It's kind of staggering, isn't it? It just shows the perceived value, maybe the bragging rights at that very initial stage.
And then there was the story of Wally Funk being on that flight.
Yes, from the Mercury 13 program.
At 82, about to become the oldest person in space. That added such a human element, didn't it? Like a lifelong dream coming true.
Absolutely. It showed it wasn't just about billionaires, it was tapping into these deeper human aspirations to explore. And interestingly, Elon Musk was there for Branson's launch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and apparently he bought a ticket on Virgin Galactic, too. And Branson even hinted he might fly on SpaceX someday.
Huh. So it's like a small, very exclusive club, but maybe with some cross-pollination?
Sort of seems that way, at least at the top. But it wasn't all friendly handshakes.
No.
Well, Blue Origin, or their social media team anyway, put out that tweet comparing their flight specifics to Virgin Galactic's.
Oh, right. Pointing out they went higher, more test flights.
And boasting about having the biggest windows in space.
Which, as one of our sources noted, might be debatable if you ask the folks on the ISS with their cupola.
Quite. But what do you make of that kind of public jousting?
Well, I suppose it's natural when you're trying to carve out a brand new market, right? Defining your edge.
Yeah, establishing your unique selling point.
Right.
And former astronaut Tom Jones had an interesting take on the tech differences,
Oh,
comparing Blue Origin's capsule, which lands under parachutes, versus Virgin Galactic's spaceplane, which lands on a runway.
okay.
He suggested the capsule might be cheaper to develop initially, but the spaceplane, well, that could potentially fly more often because it lands like an aircraft.
Interesting trade-offs.
Yeah.
And just to wrap up that initial flurry, the FAA gave Blue Origin the okay to fly people on New Shepard 2.
Right, clearing the way for Bezos' flight just after Branson.
So we had this burst of activity, these big moments. But then there's this big question hanging over it, which comes up a lot in the articles, especially Telangana today.
Yeah.
Is this really progress, or is it just a playground for the rich?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the multi-million-dollar question here.
Oh, yeah.
The price tag is just undeniable. Virgin Galactic tickets started around $250,000, apparently.
And now another source says it's more like $450,000.
Right, and orbital flights, the new space economy piece mentions tens of millions. I mean, what does that pricing really mean for who gets to go long term?
Well, it definitely fuels that argument, doesn't it? That these massive resources are going into basically joyrides for billionaires. Well, we've got huge problems down here, climate change, poverty, and the example of Yusaku Maezawa, the Japanese billionaire, booking a whole SpaceX flight around the moon that really drives home the exclusivity.
It absolutely raises fair points about access, about equity. But, the counter argument you often hear, the one the industry likes.
Is the comparison to early aviation.
Exactly. Flying started as this incredibly expensive luxury, only for the absolute elite. And over decades, it became much, much more accessible.
So the hope is history repeats itself. Competition, tech improvements bring the price down.
That's the optimistic view, yeah, that this is just the necessary, very expensive first step.
Okay, so setting aside the price tag for a moment,
Yeah.
what about the tech itself? What actual advancements are coming out of this commercial push?
Well, the big one, the one that underpins a lot of this, is reusable rockets.
SpaceX, primarily.
Pioneered by SpaceX, yeah, but others are working on it too. As, like all the sources mention, reusability is key. It drastically cuts the cost of getting anything or anyone to space.
And makes it more sustainable, presumably.
Potentially, yes. Fewer rockets being built and discarded. And beyond launch tech, this influx of private money, it's likely going to speed up research in other areas too.
Like what?
Things like microgravity experiments, developing new materials that you can only make in space, maybe even planetary science gets a boost from more frequent, cheaper missions.
And could that research actually help us back on Earth? Is there a trickle-down?
Oh, definitely potential there. Think about, say, drug development. Sometimes growing purer crystals for pharmaceuticals is easier in microgravity.
Ah, interesting.
Or creating new alloys, new materials with unique properties. And advancements in spacecraft design, life support, propulsion, those could spin off into other fields down here.
Okay, that's a fair point about potential benefits. But flipping back to the concerns, the environmental impact is a big one, right? Raised by Telangana Today and Mojatu magazine especially.
That's a really critical point, yeah. Rocket launches, they pump out a lot of CO2, but also other stuff like soot, nitrogen oxides, directly into the upper atmosphere.
Earth is more sensitive.
Exactly. These emissions can hang around up there longer and potentially have a disproportionate effect on climate and the ozone layer. So, yeah, a big increase in launches, that's a worry.
And are there solutions? I think Telangana Today mentioned things like methane-fueled rockets, maybe carbon offsets.
People are talking about those things, yes. Methane burns cleaner than current kerosene fuels. Carbon offsets are, well, they're debated, their actual effectiveness.
Right.
So it's an ongoing discussion about whether those measures are enough, especially if the launch rate really ramps up like some people envision. It's a definite trade-off to watch.
Okay. So shifting focus a bit, that New Space Economy article, it delves into why high net worth individuals actually want to do this. Let's start with the suborbital flights, the shorter ones. What's the appeal?
It seems like a mix, really. There's the thrill, right? Experiencing something totally new, something very few people have ever done. The unknown.
The ultimate adventure tourism.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's definitely a status element, prestige. Being part of that very small group of astronauts, even for a few minutes.
Okay.
And maybe for some, there's also this sense of, like, contributing to progress, being part of the story of humanity moving into space, a legacy thing.
Right, so experience, status, maybe legacy. What about the orbital flights, the longer, much more expensive ones? What drives people to commit to that?
The motivations seem maybe a bit deeper there. It's not just a quick thrill. It's about actually living in space for a time, albeit briefly.
Immersion.
Yeah, a total disconnect from earthly life and routines. And some people are interested in doing actual work up there, maybe funding or conducting some science experiments on their private mission, philanthropy even.
Hmm.
And maybe for some people living these incredibly high-pressure lives, it's just the ultimate escape.
Get away from it all, literally.
You could say that, yeah. It's fascinating how the different flight types seem to attract slightly different motivations.
But it's not all just desire, is it? The article also talks about deterrence. Things that might make even these wealthy individuals hesitate. For the suborbital trips, what are the blockers?
Well, even though it's short, there are still physical demands. The G-forces during launch and re-entry, the disorientation of weightlessness. It's not a walk in the park.
Right. Need to be reasonably fit.
Reasonably, yeah. And time commitment. Even if the flight's short, there's training, travel to the spaceport. For super busy people, that can be a hurdle.
Okay.
And maybe just value perception. Is a few minutes of weightlessness really worth $500,000 and the hassle? Some might question that.
Fair enough. What about the orbital trips? What are the turnoffs there?
Safety concerns definitely loom larger for longer, more complex missions. You're up there for days, reliant on complex systems. The risk profile is just different.
Higher stakes?
Much higher. And the time commitment is huge. Weeks or months for training, then the flight itself, then recovery time. It's a massive chunk out of your life.
Yeah.
Plus, just the practicalities. Living in a confined space, potential isolation, the basic discomforts of space adaptation syndrome. It's not exactly a five-star hotel.
It's not a luxury cruise.
Far from it. Which kind of brings us back to that big question about accessibility. Is this going to go the way of air travel, eventually opening up? Or is it destined to stay this super niche thing for the mega rich? Our sources seem divided. It's tough to say, isn't it? The aviation comparison gives you hope, like Mashatu magazine acknowledges, but they also warn about, repeating history, where the benefits of big tech leaps just end up concentrated with a tiny elite, unless we actively work to make it more democratic.
That's a really crucial point, because you hear these grand visions, right? Space hotels, trips to the moon, Mars colonies. Bezos and Musk talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's exciting, sure. But then you have the ethical question. Should we be pouring resources into that when people on Earth lack basic things like clean water or reliable infrastructure?
It's a stark contrast. And it highlights the need for, rules of the road, doesn't it? Proper safety standards, environmental regulations for this whole commercial space thing.
Absolutely essential as it grows. And it's good to see some initiatives like Space for Humanity that are actually trying to broaden access, send more diverse groups of people.
So it's not just billionaires.
Trying not to be, anyway. What's really happening here, fundamentally, is our relationship with space is changing.
How do you mean? We're shifting from just looking up at it, being observers, to actually going there, becoming participants in a private capacity, not just government.
Right.
And whether this whole space tourism thing becomes a real catalyst for broader exploration, something that benefits more people, or if it just stays this, vanity project.
Right.
That depends a lot on the choices made right now.
So, wrapping up this deep dive then.
Yeah.
We've journeyed through this new frontier of commercial space tourism, seen the billionaire race, the amazing tech, but also the really serious questions about cost, fairness, and the environment.
Yeah, and we've looked at why the super rich might want to go, and also what might give them pause.
Hopefully everyone listening feels a bit more clued in now on this whole scene. It's moving fast, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe you've got a few surprising facts to drop at your next dinner party.
Maybe. And it really leaves us with that final thought to chew on, doesn't it?
Which is?
Well, look at all the money, the brain power, the sheer ingenuity being poured into getting people off the planet, even for a few minutes. What could we achieve if that same level of focus, that same investment, was aimed squarely at fixing the biggest problems we have right here on Earth? Is space tourism an inspiring next step, a worrying distraction, or maybe somehow both?
Something to think about as we watch this next chapter unfold.